The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 47 star systems. Their military doctrine was flawless, their technology superior, their warriors legendary across the galaxy. When they encountered humanity's conventional forces, they were impressed. These humans fought with honor, strategy, and remarkable courage. The Zephyrians respected them as worthy adversaries. But respect turned to terror when they realized something chilling: the soldiers they'd been fighting weren't humanity's best. They weren't even close. Deep in the shadows of human space, beings moved that defied every law of warfare the galaxy had ever known. They had no names, no faces, no records of existence. They were ghosts made flesh, nightmares given form. The Zephyrians had spent months studying human military tactics, learning to counter their strategies, adapting to their weapons. They had prepared for war with soldiers. They had not prepared for war with shadows. This is the story of what happens when an empire built on conquest meets an enemy that doesn't just fight wars, it ends them. Forever. Admiral Kethvar stood on the command deck of the Zephyrian flagship Eternal Dominion, his forearms clasped behind his back as he studied the tactical display. The holographic representation of the Kepler system rotated slowly before him, showing the positions of both fleets. The humans had fought well, better than most species the Empire had encountered. Their ships moved with precision, their commanders displayed tactical brilliance that rivaled the great Zephyrian war colleges, and their soldiers died with honor. "Admiral," his tactical officer announced, her voice carrying the melodic tones typical of Zephyrian females, "the human defensive line is beginning to buckle. Their flagship is taking heavy damage." Kethvar nodded, his crystalline eyes reflecting the blue glow of the holodisplay. In his 3 centuries of military service, he had overseen the conquest of dozens of worlds. Some species surrendered immediately upon seeing the might of the Imperial fleet. Others fought briefly before realizing the futility of resistance. The humans were different. They had been fighting for 6 months now, system by system, never yielding ground without making the Empire pay dearly for it. "Signal the human commander," Kethvar ordered. "Offer terms of honorable surrender." His communications officer, a young male with the traditional battle scars marking his face, looked surprised. "Admiral, our doctrine suggests—" "I know what doctrine suggests," Kethvar cut him off, "but not unkindly. However, these humans have earned respect through their courage and skill. They deserve the chance to surrender with dignity." The bridge fell silent except for the subtle hum of the ship's systems. Offering terms to an enemy was unusual for the Zephyrian Empire, which typically demanded unconditional surrender. But Kethvar had been impressed by the human military's professionalism. Their soldiers followed orders even in hopeless situations, their officers showed genuine concern for their troops, and their strategies, while ultimately doomed against superior numbers and technology, displayed remarkable creativity. "Admiral," the communications officer reported, "the human commander, Rear Admiral Sarah Chen, is responding." The holodisplay shifted to show a tired-looking human woman in a blue uniform marked with insignia Kethvar had learned to recognize as those of the Terran Federation Navy. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and, despite the obvious exhaustion on her face, her eyes held the steady gaze of a professional warrior. "Admiral Kethvar," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the quantum communication link. "I appreciate your offer, but I must decline. My orders are to defend this system, and I intend to do so." Kethvar inclined his head respectfully. "Admiral Chen, your forces have fought with great honor. Your tactical innovations have been studied by our War College and added to our archives of notable military actions. There is no shame in recognizing when continued resistance serves no purpose." Chen's expression softened slightly. "You honor us with your words, Admiral. Your own conduct throughout this campaign has been exemplary. But I have my duty, as you have yours." "Then, we shall end this as warriors," Kethvar replied. "Your courage will be remembered in our victory songs." The transmission ended, and Kethvar turned back to his tactical display. The human fleet was indeed breaking apart under the sustained assault. 3 of their cruisers had already been destroyed, and their flagship was venting atmosphere from multiple breaches. It would be over within the hour. "Admiral," his sensor operator called out, "we're detecting some unusual energy signatures in the outer system. Very faint, almost at the edge of our detection range."
Kefvar frowned. Reinforcements? Unknown, sir. The signatures don't match any known human ship configurations in our database. They're strange. Strange how?
The sensor operator manipulated his controls, trying to refine the readings. They appear to be moving in ways that shouldn't be possible given the laws of physics as we understand them. And the energy signatures keep shifting, as if they're camouflaged somehow. Before Kefvar could respond, his communications officer suddenly straightened in alarm. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from High Command."
The Vega system. What about the Vega system? Kefvar demanded.
Vega had been secured 3 weeks ago, with a full occupation fleet left to maintain order.
It's gone, sir. The entire fleet.
All 7 battlecruisers, 14 destroyers, and the planetary garrison.
Over 50,000 personnel.
The bridge fell silent.
The loss of an entire fleet was unprecedented in Zephyrian military history. How? Kefvar asked quietly. Unknown, sir.
The last transmission from Fleet Admiral Zethmore was disturbing. He reported that his ships were being boarded by unknown entities. The transmission was cut short, but we could hear weapons fire and what sounded like screaming.
Kefvar's 4 hands clenched into fists.
The Vega system had been heavily fortified, with some of the Empire's most experienced commanders and elite troops.
What force could have overwhelmed them so completely?
"Sir," the sensor operator interrupted, "those energy signatures in the outer system are getting stronger.
And there are more of them now." How many more? I'm reading, this can't be right.
The computer is showing hundreds of individual signatures, but they keep flickering in and out of existence.
It's as if they're there one moment and gone the next. Kefvar moved to the sensor station and studied the readings himself. The patterns made no sense.
Objects appearing and disappearing, energy signatures that shifted between frequencies, movement patterns that violated basic physics.
Could this be some kind of new human stealth technology?
I don't think so, sir.
Admiral Chen's forces are still engaged with us here in the inner system.
These signatures are coming from a completely different vector. A chill ran down Kefvar's spine as he began to understand. The humans they had been fighting were professional soldiers, worthy opponents who followed the established rules of warfare. But what if there were others? What if the forces they had been engaging were not humanity's primary military?
"Admiral," his tactical officer announced, "Admiral Chen's flagship is requesting another communication."
Kefvar nodded, and once again the image of the human commander appeared on the display. But this time, Chen looked different. There was something in her eyes, not fear exactly, but a kind of grim anticipation.
"Admiral Kefvar," she said, "I'm going to give you one piece of advice. Retreat. Now. Take your fleet and leave this system immediately. Admiral Chen, your position is hopeless." "Why would you advise me to retreat?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Because the forces you've been fighting are the Federation Navy. We're the public face of human military might, trained to fight according to accepted galactic conventions of warfare. We have rules, protocols, codes of conduct." She paused, and Kefvar saw something that chilled him more than any threat could have: pity. "But there are others, Admiral.
Humans who operate outside those conventions.
They don't wear uniforms, they don't have ranks, and they don't take prisoners.
They exist in the spaces between official military units, in the gaps where normal soldiers can't go.
We call them the shadow operatives, though most of us aren't even supposed to know they exist." "What are you saying, Admiral?"
"I'm saying that while you've been fighting the Federation Navy, someone else has been watching.
Someone else has been learning. And now."
She gestured to her tactical display, which Kefvar could see showed the same mysterious energy signatures his own sensors were detecting. "Now they're here." Kefvar's sensor operator suddenly stood up, his voice tight with barely controlled panic.
"Admiral, the signatures are moving.
They're approaching our fleet position at incredible speed." "Evasive action," Kefvar commanded, but his sensor operator shook his head. "Sir, they're not approaching in formation.
They're everywhere. All around us.
I'm reading energy signatures inside our own formation. The main display suddenly flickered and went dark. Emergency lighting bathed the bridge in a red glow as backup systems struggled to compensate for whatever was happening to their primary sensors.
Report! Kethvar shouted. Unknown, sir. All external sensors are being jammed or disrupted somehow. We're effectively blind.
On the communication channel, Admiral Chen's voice came through one final time. Admiral Kethvar, you conducted yourself with honor throughout this campaign.
I regret that honor will not protect you from what comes next.
The transmission cut out, and Kethvar was left staring at a blank screen. Around him, his crew worked frantically to restore systems and establish some sense of what was happening beyond their hull.
But, deep in his heart, the Admiral already knew.
They had been fighting the wrong humans entirely.
Captain Veltar commanded the destroyer Swift Retribution on the outer edge of the Zephyrian formation.
He was a veteran of 30 campaigns, decorated for valor in the battles of Andromache and Proxima, and considered one of the finest tactical minds in the Imperial Navy. When his sensors began showing impossible readings, his first instinct was to run a full diagnostic.
Engineering, he called through the ship's communication system. Are our sensor arrays functioning properly?
All systems show green, Captain, came the reply from his chief engineer.
But the readings we're getting don't make sense.
According to our instruments, there are objects moving through our position that aren't there.
Veltar frowned. Define aren't there.
Visual confirmation shows empty space, Captain. But our sensors insist there are solid objects occupying that same space. Large objects. Before Veltar could respond, his security chief's voice crackled over the intercom with a tone the captain had never heard before, raw terror.
Captain, we have intruders in Section 7.
But, that's impossible. Section 7 is in the middle of the ship, with no external access points.
How many intruders? Unknown, sir.
Security cameras show empty corridors, but my teams are reporting contact with hostile forces.
We're taking casualties.
Veltar grabbed his sidearm and headed for the security station.
I'm coming down.
Sir, I would advise against the communication cut off abruptly. Veltar broke into a run, his mind racing.
How could there be intruders in the middle of his ship? How could security cameras show empty corridors while his teams fought for their lives?
He reached the security station to find it abandoned. Computer terminals flickered with error messages, and there was a smell in the air he didn't recognize, something acrid and metallic. On the main security display, he could see his own security teams moving through the corridors, weapons raised, firing at targets that weren't visible on the cameras. Veltar activated his personal communicator.
Security Team Alpha, this is the captain. Report your status.
Static answered him for several long seconds, then a voice came through, distorted and filled with panic.
Captain, can't see them, they're everywhere. Geth is down, oh gods, they took Zealand. Who? Who took Zealand?
The shadows, Captain.
The shadows are alive.
The transmission ended in a burst of static and what sounded like weapons fire. Veltar tried raising other teams, other sections of his ship, but received only silence or screams. He made his way to the bridge, sealing blast doors behind him. His bridge crew looked up as he entered, their faces reflecting the same confusion and growing terror he felt. Captain, his tactical officer reported, we've lost contact with most of the ship. Internal communications are failing, and I'm reading massive power fluctuations throughout our systems.
Weapon status? All weapon systems are offline, sir. Not damaged, just offline. Our targeting computers won't lock onto anything.
Veltar moved to his command chair, trying to project calm authority even as his world fell apart around him. Through the main view screen, he could see other Zephyrian ships in the distance, and some of them were wrong. Their lights were flickering in patterns that made no sense, as if the ships themselves were stuttering in and out of reality. Sir, his helmsman called out, I'm reading something on short-range sensors. Something big, approaching from our starboard side.
On screen.
The view screen flickered to life, showing the star field to their right. For a moment, there was nothing visible.
Then, as if materializing from nothingness itself, a shape began to form. It wasn't a ship in any sense Veltar understood. It was pure darkness given form, a void in space that seemed to bend light around its edges. No lights, no exhaust signatures, no heat emissions, just an absence of everything that should be there. "What is that?" his tactical officer whispered. Veltar didn't answer because he didn't know.
The dark shape moved closer, and, as it did, Veltar realized it was massive, easily the size of a battlecruiser, but utterly unlike anything in any database.
"Captain," came a new voice over the ship's communication system, but this wasn't one of his crew.
The voice was human, calm and professional, with no trace of emotion.
"You have 30 seconds to prepare your final messages to your families."
"Who is this?"
Veltar demanded. "How are you accessing our communications?"
"We are who your Admiral Chen tried to warn your fleet commander about.
We are the ones your empire did not plan for."
Veltar's crew looked to him for orders, but what orders could he give? Their weapons were offline, their sensors showed impossible readings, and intruders were somehow inside his ship despite all security measures.
"What do you want?" he asked. "Nothing from you, Captain. Your part in this war ended the moment we arrived.
You fought against our conventional forces and earned their respect.
But respect will not save you from us. We are not the humans you learned to fight. We are the humans your nightmares never imagined."
The view screen flickered, and, suddenly, Veltar could see inside his own ship. Corridors that should have been familiar were filled with strange, shifting shadows that moved independently of any light source. His security teams were visible, but they were retreating, firing their weapons at enemies that appeared only as dark shapes at the edges of perception.
"How are you doing this?"
Veltar whispered.
"That question assumes we are bound by the same physical laws that limit your understanding of warfare. We are not."
The dark shape outside had moved closer, and now Veltar could see that it wasn't solid at all. It was more like a hole in space, and, through that hole, other shapes were emerging.
Smaller craft, each as impossible as the first, each moving in ways that violated everything he knew about physics and engineering. "Captain," his engineering chief's voice crackled through the intercom, "something's wrong with the reactor."
"It's operating at full capacity, but we're not drawing any power from it. It's as if something else is using our energy." Veltar closed his eyes. In all his years of military service, he had never faced an enemy like this. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered species with superior technology, greater numbers, even advanced psychic abilities. But they had all followed certain rules, certain limitations imposed by the physical universe. These humans seemed to operate outside those rules entirely. "Sir," his tactical officer reported quietly, "I'm reading similar events occurring throughout our fleet.
Multiple ships are going dark, losing communications, reporting impossible intrusions." Through the communication channel, the human voice returned.
"Your Admiral Kethvar will survive to carry word back to your empire.
One ship from your fleet will be spared to serve as witness. The rest of you..."
There was a pause. "The rest of you will serve a different purpose."
"What purpose?"
Veltar asked, though he feared the answer.
"You will become a message.
A demonstration of what happens when an empire makes the mistake of threatening humanity's worlds. Your deaths will not be in vain, Captain. They will serve to prevent a much larger war." The bridge lights began to dim, and Veltar could feel a strange sensation, as if the very air around him was becoming thicker, harder to breathe. His crew was struggling now, gasping and clutching at their throats. "Remember, Captain," the voice continued, "you fought against soldiers, and they honored your courage.
But we are not soldiers. We are something else entirely.
We are the shadow cast by humanity's light, and that shadow is very, very long." The last thing Captain Veltar saw before darkness claimed his vision was the impossible sight of figures moving through his bridge, not walking, but flowing like liquid darkness, reaching out with limbs that seemed to phase in and out of reality.
The Zephyrian Empire had spent months learning to fight humans.
They had never learned to fight the dark. High Admiral Zethara stood in the war room of the Imperial Palace on Zephyros Prime, surrounded by holographic displays showing the locations of the Empire's fleets across 47 conquered systems. Each display should have shown the steady blue lights indicating Imperial control and the regular patrol patterns of occupation forces. Instead, 17 of those displays now showed nothing but static, and 3 more were flickering ominously. "Report," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. Fleet Intelligence Director Morkath stepped forward, his crystalline carapace reflecting the dim lighting of the war room. "High Admiral, we have lost contact with 20 Imperial fleets in the past 72 hours. The pattern is consistent across all incidents." "What pattern?" Morkath manipulated the central holodisplay, highlighting the affected systems. Each fleet reported contact with conventional human forces first. Standard engagements, following expected tactical parameters. Then, shortly before communications were lost, fleet commanders reported unusual sensor readings and the presence of unknown entities. Zethara studied the display with growing unease. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds over millennia. They had faced every conceivable form of resistance, technological, biological, psychic, even temporal manipulations attempted by the Chronos Collective. Nothing had ever threatened multiple fleets simultaneously across such vast distances. "Define unknown entities," she said. "That's where our intelligence becomes problematic," Morkath admitted. Surviving communications fragments mention intruders aboard Imperial ships, but security recordings show empty corridors. Weapons fired directed at targets that don't appear on sensors. Reports of beings that can phase through solid matter. Another figure stepped from the shadows at the edge of the room. Lord Commander Kyth Mose, head of Imperial Special Operations, was a legend within military circles. His black armor bore the scars of 1,000 battles, and his reputation for successful impossible missions had earned him the personal trust of the Emperor himself. "With respect, High Admiral," he said, "this sounds like psychological warfare. The humans are using some form of advanced technology to create hallucinations or false sensor readings." "Then, how do you explain the complete destruction of 20 fleets, Lord Commander?" Zethara asked. "I don't. Yet. But, I intend to." Kyth Mose moved to the display controls. "Grant me authorization to deploy the Shadow Legion to the Kepler system." Admiral Kethvar's last transmission indicated unusual activity there before communications were lost. Zethara considered this. The Shadow Legion was the Empire's most elite force, warriors enhanced with experimental technology and trained in unconventional warfare. They operated outside normal military command structures and were deployed only in the most extreme circumstances. Authorization granted. "How many operatives do you require?" "All of them." The High Admiral's eyes widened. "Lord Commander, the entire Shadow Legion consists of over 3,000 of our most valuable assets." "Are you certain, High Admiral? We are facing an enemy that has eliminated 20 Imperial fleets without leaving a single survivor to provide intelligence. Whatever these humans are doing, it's beyond conventional military response." "I need our best." Zethara nodded slowly. "Very well. But, I want real-time communication maintained throughout the operation. No communications blackouts, no matter what you encounter." "Understood." As Kyth Mose left to prepare his forces, Morkath approached the High Admiral with another display showing intercepted human communications. "High Admiral, our signals intelligence has discovered something interesting. Human military communications contain references to something called Black Protocol. It's mentioned only in the most heavily encrypted channels, and always in connection with complete communications shutdowns in affected regions." "What is Black Protocol?" "Unknown. However, our xenobiology experts have analyzed the few human prisoners we've taken from conventional engagements. Under interrogation, most claim complete ignorance of any special forces beyond their regular military. But, a few." He paused. "A few what, Director?" "A few react with genuine terror when asked about shadow operations. Not the fear of a soldier for an enemy, but the fear of prey for a predator. They speak of humans who aren't entirely human anymore, of soldiers who chose to become something else." Zethara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the controlled climate of the war room. In her centuries of military service, she had learned to trust her instincts, and every instinct was now screaming that the Empire faced something unprecedented. Director, I want every available resource focused on gathering intelligence about these shadow operations. Contact our spies in neutral systems, interrogate any captured humans more thoroughly, and analyze every fragment of data from the lost fleets.
Already begun, High Admiral.
On the edge of the Kepler system, Lord Commander Kyth Mose stood in the command center of the stealth ship Voidhunter.
Around him, the finest warriors in the Zephyrian Empire prepared for deployment.
Each member of the Shadow Legion had undergone years of enhancement, neural implants that increased reaction time, genetic modifications that improved strength and endurance, and cybernetic systems that allowed them to interface directly with their weapons and equipment.
Status report, he commanded. Captain Nethsil, his second-in-command, consulted her tactical display.
All 30 ships have achieved position around the Kepler system.
Sensor networks are deployed, and our cloaking systems are holding steady. If there's anything unusual in this system, we'll detect it. Kyth Mose nodded.
The Shadow Legion ships were marvels of Imperial engineering, capable of remaining undetected by virtually any known sensor technology. Each ship carried only 100 operatives, but those operatives represented the pinnacle of Zephyrian military evolution.
What about Admiral Kethvar's fleet? We found the debris field where the main engagement occurred. Analysis indicates that Admiral Chen's Federation Navy forces were completely destroyed, as expected.
But Nethsil frowned at her readings.
But what, Captain? There's no sign of Admiral Kethvar's fleet.
No debris, no wreckage, no energy residue from destroyed ships. It's as if 300 vessels simply vanished.
This was wrong. Even if an enemy possessed weapons capable of completely vaporizing Imperial warships, there should still be some trace exotic particles, gravitational disturbances, something. The complete absence of evidence was more disturbing than any amount of wreckage would have been.
Sir, his communications officer reported, I'm detecting very faint energy signatures throughout the system. They're almost below our detection threshold, but they're there.
Show me.
The main display illuminated with hundreds of tiny blips scattered across the Kepler system.
They were moving in complex patterns that defied easy analysis, appearing and disappearing seemingly at random. Could these be natural phenomena? Kyth Mose asked.
Negative, sir. The patterns are too organized, too purposeful. Whatever these are, they're under intelligent control.
Kyth Mose studied the display for several long minutes.
His enhanced intellect processed thousands of tactical possibilities, looking for patterns, weaknesses, anything that could give him an advantage against this unknown enemy. But the more he studied the readings, the more convinced he became that he was looking at something entirely outside his experience. All ships, assume combat positions.
Begin sensor sweep of the entire system.
I want to know what happened to Admiral Kethvar's fleet. The 30 ships of the Shadow Legion spread throughout the Kepler system, their advanced sensors probing every planet, asteroid, and particle of cosmic dust. For 6 hours, they searched methodically, finding nothing but the mysterious energy signatures that seemed to dance just beyond the edge of understanding. Then, Lieutenant Vorthake made a discovery that changed everything.
Lord Commander, the young officer's voice carried an edge of barely controlled excitement. I think I've found Admiral Kethvar's fleet.
Where?
Everywhere. Kyth Mose moved to Vorthake's station.
The display showed a three-dimensional map of the entire Kepler system, with thousands of tiny markers distributed throughout.
Explain, Kyth Mose demanded.
Sir, I've been analyzing the energy signatures we detected.
They're not random phenomena, they're ship components. Fragments of Imperial vessels scattered across the entire system, but not by explosions or weapons fire. Then, how?
Based on the distribution patterns and energy residue analysis, it appears that Admiral Kethvar's entire fleet was disassembled. Each ship was taken apart at the molecular level and the resulting matter distributed across billions of cubic kilometers of space.
The command center fell silent.
The technology required to disassemble 300 starships without creating any detectable energy burst was beyond anything in the Zephyrian database.
Sir, Captain Nethsil said quietly, what kind of weapons could do this? Before Kythmos could answer, every screen in the command center flickered and went dark. Emergency lighting bathed the room in red as backup systems struggled to compensate for the sudden system failure. Report! Kythmos shouted. Unknown system failure, sir. All primary sensors are offline, communications are jammed, and... The tactical officer paused, staring at his instruments in confusion. Sir, according to our internal sensors, we're no longer in space.
What do you mean?
I mean our sensors indicate that this ship is currently inside a solid object approximately the size and density of a small moon. Kythmos activated his personal scanner, a device built into his cybernetic enhancements that was independent of the ship's systems. The readings it provided made no sense. According to his scanner, the Void Hunter was indeed embedded within solid matter, but that matter had the same atomic composition as empty space. Sir, came a voice over the emergency communication system, this is Sergeant Kilthamar in the armory.
We have intruders.
How many?
What's their position?
Unknown, sir. Our internal sensors show no foreign life signs, but I can see them.
They're standing right in front of me.
The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of weapons fire and something else, something that sounded like reality itself was being torn apart.
Kythmos drew his sidearm and activated his personal force field.
Around him, his command crew did the same, their enhanced reflexes and cybernetic systems preparing them for combat against an enemy they couldn't understand.
All hands, this is the Lord Commander. We are under attack by unknown hostiles. Battle stations, full defensive measures.
Through the ship's internal communication system came the voices of his warriors, the finest soldiers in the Empire, reporting contact with enemies that couldn't be detected by sensors, weapons fire against targets that weren't there, and casualties inflicted by beings that seemed to exist only partially in normal space.
Lord Commander, Captain Nethsil reported, I'm receiving similar reports from all ships in the fleet.
Every vessel is reporting intruders, but our sensors show nothing.
Kythmos activated his command override, accessing the ship's security cameras directly through his neural interface.
What he saw challenged everything he understood about reality. The corridors of his ship were filled with figures that his eyes could perceive but his brain struggled to process. They moved like liquid darkness given form, flowing around corners and through solid bulkheads as if physical barriers meant nothing to them. When his warriors fired their weapons, the energy beams passed through empty air, but somehow, the dark figures were affected, staggering and reforming like smoke in a breeze.
Sir, his tactical officer called out, I'm reading massive power drains throughout the ship. Something is feeding on our energy systems.
The lights began to dim, and Kythmos realized that whatever these entities were, they weren't just intruders, they were parasites, feeding on the very systems that kept his ship operational. Then, the screens flickered back to life, and a human face appeared on the main display. It was a man, middle-aged, with gray hair and eyes that held no trace of warmth or humanity.
Lord Commander Kythmos of the Shadow Legion, the man said in perfect Zephyrian. You are the Empire's elite, enhanced and augmented to be the perfect warriors. We've been waiting for you. Who are you? We are what your Empire forced humanity to become. When you began your conquest of our worlds, you thought you were fighting our military. You adapted to their tactics, learned to counter their strategies, defeated their conventional forces. But, you made one critical error.
What error?
You assumed that our military represented the full extent of human capability for warfare. It does not. The display changed, showing views from throughout Kythmos' ship. His warriors, the finest soldiers in the Empire, were being systematically hunted by entities that seemed to exist in the spaces between normal reality. Some of his men were simply disappearing, their life signs ceasing without any visible cause. Others were found in sealed compartments, unconscious but alive, with no memory of how they had been rendered helpless. Lord Commander, the human continued, your Shadow Legion represents centuries of military evolution, genetic enhancement, and technological augmentation. You are as close to perfect warriors as your empire can create. What's your point? Our point is that perfection within known parameters is still limited by those parameters. You enhanced your soldiers to fight better wars. We changed ours to fight different wars.
Through his neural interface, Kyth could feel his ship's systems failing one by one.
Power conduits were being drained, computer networks were being infiltrated by something that wasn't quite software, and his warriors were falling to enemies that his sensors insisted weren't there.
"What do you want?" he asked.
"We want your empire to understand what humanity is capable of when we stop playing by your rules."
Admiral Kefvar's fleet was a demonstration of our defensive capabilities.
"Your Shadow Legion will serve as a demonstration of our offensive potential."
The lights failed completely, plunging the command center into darkness.
In that darkness, Kyth could hear movement, not footsteps, but something like the whisper of wind through leaves, or water flowing over stone. "Lord Commander," came the human voice, now seeming to emanate from the darkness itself, "you were enhanced to be the perfect soldier. But we were changed to be something that soldiers cannot fight." Kyth felt something brush against his mind, not telepathy, but something deeper, something that touched the very core of his consciousness. In that touch, he experienced a brief glimpse of what these entities truly were: humans who had undergone changes so radical that they barely qualified as the same species, beings who had sacrificed their humanity to become living weapons of unimaginable capability. "Your empire will receive one survivor from this engagement," the voice continued. "One witness to carry word of what humanity can become when forced to evolve beyond the constraints of conventional warfare.
The rest of your legion will serve our purposes."
"What purposes?" "You will become our ambassadors to the rest of your empire.
Modified, enhanced, changed to serve our needs. You will return to Zephyrian space carrying our message in ways that words cannot convey."
Kyth tried to activate his weapons, his force field, any of his enhancements that might give him a fighting chance. But his cybernetic systems were no longer responding to his commands. Something else was controlling them now, something that understood Imperial technology better than the Imperials themselves.
"Sleep now, Lord Commander. When you awaken, you will understand your new purpose."
The last thing Kyth saw before consciousness faded was a pair of eyes that reflected no light, set in a face that seemed to shift and blur at the edges of perception. Eyes that had once been human but were now something else entirely. The Shadow Legion, the finest warriors the Zephyrian Empire had ever produced, had been neutralized without firing a single effective shot. In the darkness between the stars, something that had once been human smiled with a mouth that no longer quite existed in the same dimension as the rest of reality. The evolution of the war was proceeding exactly as planned. Emperor Valdric the Conqueror stood in the center of the crystal throne room, his massive form dwarfing even the towering pillars that supported the chamber's vaulted ceiling. At 12 feet tall and possessing 4 arms, each capable of crushing steel, he was the genetic pinnacle of Zephyrian evolution. His crystalline skin reflected the light of 1,000 holocrystal displays that surrounded him, each showing the current status of the Empire's holdings.
Too many of those displays now showed red.
43 fleets, he said, his voice resonating through the chamber like distant thunder.
43 of my fleets have simply vanished.
No distress signals, no wreckage, no survivors.
How does an empire that has conquered half the galaxy lose 43 fleets to an enemy we barely understand? High Admiral Zethara knelt before the crystal throne, her head bowed in shame.
"Your Imperial Majesty, our intelligence services are working around the clock to understand this threat. What we know suggests that humanity possesses military capabilities far beyond what we initially encountered. What we initially encountered were honorable warriors who fought according to established galactic conventions," Emperor Valdric replied. "These new entities operate by no conventions at all."
"Show me the reports from the survivors."
The Emperor's request was itself a problem. There were precious few survivors to provide reports. Of the thousands of ships and millions of personnel that had simply disappeared, only a handful of witnesses remained. Each survivor told the same impossible story: enemies that couldn't be detected, weapons that affected targets beyond the range of sensors, and entities that seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime. But it was the most recent survivor who had provided the most disturbing intelligence. "Your Majesty," High Admiral Zethara said, "Captain Corthinal of the cruiser Stellar Fury was found drifting in the Proxima system 3 days ago. His ship was intact but empty, his entire crew had vanished. Captain Corthinal was found in his command chair, conscious but changed."
"Changed how?"
"The medical staff is still conducting examinations, but preliminary reports suggest that something has been done to his neural pathways.
He speaks normally, responds to questions, follows orders, but his brain scans show unusual patterns. It's as if additional neural networks have been constructed within his existing brain structure. Emperor Valdric leaned forward on his throne. "Bring him to me."
Within minutes, Captain Corthinal was escorted into the throne room by 2 guards. He appeared normal at first glance, a typical Zephyrian naval officer with the standard augmentations and the bearing of a professional soldier. But something in his eyes was wrong. They held a depth that seemed to extend beyond what should be possible, as if he were seeing multiple layers of reality simultaneously. "Captain," the Emperor commanded, "report on what happened to your ship and crew." Corthinal stood at attention and began to speak in a steady, professional tone. "Your Imperial Majesty, the Stellar Fury was conducting a routine patrol sweep of the Proxima system when we encountered anomalous sensor readings. Before we could identify the source, our ship was infiltrated by unknown entities."
Describe these entities.
"They appeared to be humanoid but possessed capabilities that defy conventional understanding of physics. They moved through solid matter, manipulated our ship's systems without physical contact, and demonstrated an understanding of Imperial technology that exceeded our own."
So far, Corthinal's report matched those of other survivors.
But what came next had never been reported before.
"However, Your Majesty, I must report that these entities did not simply destroy my crew. They recruited them."
The throne room fell silent.
Emperor Valdric's 4 eyes focused intently on the captain. "Explain."
"The entities offered my crew a choice, death or transformation. Those who chose transformation were subjected to a process that modified their fundamental nature. They became something between human and Zephyrian, possessing capabilities of both species but limited by neither."
"And you, Captain? What choice did you make?" Corthinal's eyes seemed to shimmer with an inner light that definitely hadn't been there before. "I chose transformation, Your Majesty."
"As did most of my crew. We serve now as ambassadors between our species and theirs." Emperor Valdric rose from his throne, towering over the captain.
"Ambassadors? You serve the enemy that has destroyed 43 of my fleets?"
"With respect, Your Imperial Majesty, I serve the survival of both our species. The humans we initially encountered were indeed limited by conventional military thinking. But, when faced with extinction, humanity chose to evolve beyond those limitations. They became something that traditional military force cannot defeat."
"Nothing cannot be defeated by sufficient force."
Corthinal's expression didn't change, but something in the air around him seemed to shift, as if reality itself had become slightly more flexible in his presence.
"Your Majesty, may I demonstrate?"
Before the Emperor could respond, Captain Corthinal simply ceased to exist. Not vanishing in a flash of light or teleportation effect, but simply stepping out of normal reality as easily as walking through a doorway. The guards raised their weapons, but there was nothing to target. Emperor Valdric activated his personal force field and drew his ceremonial weapon, a plasma blade capable of cutting through battle armor. But the weapon felt suddenly heavy in his hands, and the force field flickered unstably. "I am still here, Your Majesty," came Corthinal's voice from everywhere and nowhere at once.
"I exist in the spaces between the dimensions you perceive as reality.
From here, I can affect your dimension without being affected by it." The Emperor's weapon suddenly became too hot to hold, forcing him to drop it. Around the throne room, the holocrystal displays began showing images that weren't being transmitted from their intended sources, views of Zephyrian worlds under attack by entities that couldn't be seen, Imperial fleets being systematically dismantled by forces that existed only partially in normal space. "The humans call themselves the Shadow Operatives," Corthinal's voice continued.
"They represent what happens when a species chooses to abandon the limitations of physical existence in order to survive.
They are not bound by the same dimensional constraints that limit conventional military forces." Captain Corthinal materialized again, appearing exactly where he had been standing before, as if he had never left. The Emperor's weapon was once again cool to the touch, and his force field stabilized. "The transformation process," Corthinal explained, "allows beings from either species to exist across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. We retain our consciousness and memories, but gain abilities that transcend conventional physics. Emperor Valdric studied the captain carefully.
What do these shadow operatives want?
They want to end this war before it destroys both civilizations. The Zephyrian Empire possesses vast military resources and advanced technology.
Humanity possesses the ability to transcend dimensional limitations.
Separately, both species are vulnerable. Together, they could become something unprecedented in galactic history.
You're proposing an alliance with the species we're trying to conquer?
I'm proposing evolution, Your Majesty. The humans have already begun transforming selected members of Imperial forces who prove compatible with the process. Lord Commander Kyth Mose and several of his Shadow Legion operatives have successfully undergone the transformation. They retain their loyalty to the Empire but now possess capabilities that make them essentially unstoppable.
The Emperor considered this.
The Zephyrian Empire had always grown through conquest and absorption of useful technologies from defeated species. But this was different. This was fundamental alteration of what it meant to be Zephyrian.
What are the risks of this transformation process?
Approximately 30% of subjects do not survive the process. Of those who do survive, roughly half experience permanent psychological changes that make them unsuitable for return to normal society.
However, those who successfully complete the transformation become weapons of unimaginable potential. High Admiral Zephyra stepped forward.
Your Majesty, if I may, we've been analyzing the tactical implications of entities that can operate across dimensional boundaries.
Traditional military responses are completely ineffective.
Our weapons cannot target them, our sensors cannot track them, and our defenses cannot stop them. But, Emperor Valdric said thoughtfully, our transformed personnel would possess the same capabilities.
Exactly, Your Majesty.
Captain Corthinal's demonstration shows that transformed individuals can affect normal reality without being limited by it. An army of such beings would be unstoppable by any conventional force. The Emperor walked to the large window that dominated one wall of the throne room, looking out over the capital city of Zephyros Prime. Millions of his subjects lived and worked below, unaware that their empire faced its greatest crisis in millennia. The choice before him would determine whether the Zephyrian Empire continued its expansion across the galaxy or faced extinction at the hands of an enemy that couldn't be defeated by traditional means. Captain Corthinal, he said finally, arrange a meeting with these shadow operatives. I want to speak with their leaders directly.
They are already here, Your Majesty.
The Emperor spun around to find the throne room had changed. The walls were the same, the floor unchanged, but the space between seemed to contain more dimensions than before. Figures stood in alcoves that hadn't existed moments earlier, humanoid shapes that seemed to be composed of living shadow, their forms shifting and flowing like liquid darkness. One of these figures stepped forward, becoming more solid and defined as it approached. It resolved into the shape of a human woman, middle-aged, wearing what appeared to be a military uniform that existed in several dimensions simultaneously. Your Imperial Majesty, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested she was speaking across multiple dimensional frequencies, I am Director Sarah Chen, formerly Admiral Chen of the Terran Federation Navy. Emperor Valdric recognized the name from intelligence reports. You were reported killed when Admiral Kethvar's fleet destroyed your forces in the Kepler system.
Death is a limitation we have learned to transcend, Your Majesty.
My physical form was indeed destroyed in that engagement, but consciousness is not bound by physical constraints once one learns to exist across dimensional boundaries.
What you're describing is impossible. What we are describing is evolution, Your Majesty.
When faced with extinction by a superior military force, humanity chose to change rather than die. We abandoned the limitations of single-dimensional existence and became something that could survive contact with your empire's war machine. Another figure stepped forward, this one taking the shape of a familiar form, Lord Commander Kyth Mose, but changed in fundamental ways. His body flickered between solid matter and something that resembled controlled energy, and his eyes held the same dimensional depth that Captain Corthinal's possessed. Your Imperial Majesty, Kyth Mose said, the transformation process has enhanced my capabilities beyond anything I previously imagined possible. I can exist in normal space when needed, but also operate in dimensions where conventional weapons and sensors cannot reach me. I remain loyal to the Empire, but I now serve a larger purpose.
What purpose? Director Chen answered.
The purpose of preventing this war from destroying both our civilizations. The Zephyrian Empire seeks to expand across the galaxy, but it does so using conventional military thinking. Humanity has evolved beyond such limitations.
Rather than continue a conflict that can only end in mutual destruction, we propose synthesis. Synthesis?
Combination of Zephyrian military organization and technology with human dimensional transcendence capabilities. Your empire gains access to abilities that make conquest unnecessary. When you can exist across multiple dimensions, the concept of territorial control becomes obsolete. Humanity gains access to the resources and infrastructure needed to accelerate our evolutionary process.
Emperor Valdric studied the assembled figures. And if I refuse this proposal?
The throne room suddenly filled with hundreds of shadow figures, each one clearly capable of operating beyond the reach of conventional defenses. The message was clear: refusal would not result in a continuation of the current war, but in the complete absorption or destruction of the Zephyrian Empire by beings that couldn't be fought using traditional methods.
Your Majesty, Director Chen said, we are not offering conquest in a different form. We are offering evolution into something greater than either species could become alone.
Those who undergo the transformation process retain their individual consciousness and cultural identity while gaining capabilities that transcend physical limitations.
How many of my people would need to undergo this process?
Initially, we would begin with volunteers from your military and scientific communities.
Approximately 1% of your population would provide sufficient numbers to demonstrate the potential of the synthesis.
Those who prove compatible and successful could then oversee the gradual transformation of others who choose to undergo the process.
The Emperor considered the proposal.
The alternative was clear: continued resistance against an enemy that had already demonstrated the ability to eliminate Imperial fleets without leaving survivors. But accepting the proposal meant fundamental changes to the nature of Zephyrian civilization. I will need guarantees that transformed Zephyrians will retain their loyalty to the Empire and their cultural identity.
Granted, Your Majesty.
The transformation process enhances capabilities but does not alter fundamental personality or allegiances. And I will need assurance that this process is reversible for those who find it unsuitable.
Director Chen paused. The transformation process is permanent, Your Majesty. However, transformed individuals can choose to limit their activities to normal dimensional space if they prefer.
They retain the ability to function as traditional Zephyrians while possessing additional capabilities they can access when needed. Emperor Valdric made his decision.
Very well.
We will begin with a limited trial involving volunteers from the Shadow Legion and selected members of the Imperial Science Division.
If the process proves beneficial without compromising Zephyrian identity, we will consider broader implementation.
Agreed, Your Majesty.
The trial process will begin immediately.
As the shadow figures began to fade back into the dimensional spaces they inhabited, Director Chen remained solid for a moment longer. Your Imperial Majesty, you should know that other galactic civilizations are also being contacted with similar proposals.
The universe is about to change in fundamental ways.
Those who choose to evolve will shape the future of galactic civilization.
Those who refuse will become irrelevant.
With that, she too faded into the spaces between dimensions, leaving Emperor Valdric alone with his thoughts and the realization that the age of conventional warfare had ended.
The Zephyrian Empire would either revolve or be left behind by forces that operated beyond the boundaries of normal reality.
The transformation of both civilizations had begun. Dr. Elon Morrison stood in what had once been the primary research laboratory of the Terran Federation Science Division, though the term stood was becoming increasingly inaccurate. Her consciousness existed across 17 different dimensional layers simultaneously, and her physical form had become something that could be described as approximately human only if one wasn't looking too closely. She was no longer entirely sure she was still human, but that was a philosophical question for another time. Right now, she had more immediate concerns. The first batch of Zephyrian volunteers for the transformation process had arrived at the Kepler research station, and her job was to ensure they survived in procedure that had a 30% mortality rate even for humans. Status report on the volunteers, she said, her voice carrying across dimensions to reach her research team scattered throughout normal space and several parallel realities. Dr. James Park, her former colleague who had been among the first successful human transformations, materialized beside her in a flicker of displaced spacetime. We have 12 Zephyrian volunteers from the Shadow Legion and 8 from their science division. All have been briefed on the risks, and all have signed consent forms acknowledging the permanent nature of the process.
What about psychological evaluations? Interesting results there.
The Zephyrians who volunteered all scored exceptionally high on adaptability metrics, but their neural structure is significantly different from human baselines. We may need to modify the transformation protocols to account for their 4-chamber brain configuration.
Elon nodded, though the gesture was largely meaningless when performed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. What's Lord Commander KYTH Moses' assessment of the volunteers? As if summoned by her question, KYTH Mose materialized in the laboratory. His transformation had been one of the more successful human-Zephyrian hybrid processes, and he now served as a liaison between the two species during the experimental phase. Dr. Morrison, he said, the volunteers are prepared. However, I should warn you that several of them have expressed concerns about maintaining their connection to Zephyrian culture after transformation. Understandable concerns. What assurances have you given them? That transformation enhances capability but does not alter fundamental identity.
I remain KYTH Mose, loyal to the Empire and committed to Zephyrian values. I have simply gained the ability to exist in ways that transcend conventional limitations.
Elon studied KYTH Mose carefully.
His transformation had been remarkable. He retained all of his strategic thinking, military discipline, and cultural identity while gaining dimensional transcendence capabilities that made him virtually unstoppable as a warrior. But she had noticed subtle changes in his thinking patterns, a tendency to view problems from perspectives that weren't quite human or Zephyrian.
Lord Commander, she said, what's your assessment of the broader integration process? How are other transformed Zephyrians adapting to their new capabilities?
Better than expected in most cases. Captain Corthinal has successfully trained 16 of his crew members to operate across dimensional boundaries while maintaining their roles as Imperial naval personnel. They function normally within Zephyrian military hierarchy but possess abilities that make them invaluable for operations against conventional forces.
And the failures? KYTH Moses' expression darkened. 3 subjects experienced complete psychological breakdown during the process.
They survived physically but lost all sense of individual identity. Director Chen has classified them as absorbed into the collective consciousness rather than dead, but, for practical purposes, the individuals they once were no longer exist.
This was the risk that kept Elon awake during the few hours she still allocated to conventional sleep. The transformation process didn't just grant dimensional transcendence, it connected consciousness to a broader network that included all successfully transformed individuals. Most subjects retained their individual identity while gaining access to collective knowledge and capabilities, but some simply dissolved into the larger whole. Dr. Morrison, came another voice, this one from Director Chen, who chose to speak from a dimension slightly offset from normal space. We're ready to begin the next phase of Zephyrian transformations. Elon shifted her attention to the transformation chamber, a device that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously and had been constructed using principles that combined human quantum physics with Zephyrian dimensional engineering. Inside the chamber, the first volunteer lay on a table that flickered between solid matter and pure energy. The volunteer was Major Velthora of the Shadow Legion, a veteran of dozens of campaigns who had volunteered for every dangerous assignment in her career. Her forearmed form was typical for Zephyrian military personnel: enhanced strength, improved reaction time, and cybernetic systems that interfaced with Imperial weapons and equipment. Major Elon said, speaking across dimensional barriers to reach the volunteer's consciousness, "Are you prepared to begin the process?" "I am ready, Dr. Morrison. Lord Commander KYTH Mose has explained what I can expect, and I understand the risks." Elon activated the transformation systems.
Energy that existed across multiple dimensional planes began flowing through the chamber, guided by computational systems that processed information in 17 different realities simultaneously. The process was part surgery, part consciousness transfer, and part fundamental alteration of the subject's relationship with spacetime. For the first hour, Major Velthora's vital signs remained stable. The transformation protocols were rewriting her neural pathways, expanding her consciousness to exist across dimensional boundaries, and modifying her cellular structure to function in multiple realities simultaneously.
Then, something went wrong.
Dr. Morrison, Dr. Park reported, I'm reading unusual neural activity.
The Major's consciousness is fragmenting across too many dimensional layers. Elan checked her instruments.
Instead of the normal pattern showing gradual expansion of consciousness across controlled dimensional boundaries, Major Valthora's mind was scattering across dozens of parallel realities.
Emergency protocols, Elan commanded. Begin consciousness consolidation procedures. But it was too late.
On the transformation table, Major Valthora's body began to phase in and out of existence as her consciousness became distributed across dimensional space. Her eyes opened, but they reflected light from realities that didn't exist in normal space.
Can you hear me, Major? Elan asked.
Yes, came the reply, but the voice seemed to come from multiple sources at once.
I can hear everything. I exist everywhere now.
I am in the chamber, but I am also on Zephyros Prime, and in the void between galaxies, and in realities that have no names. This was what they called dimensional overflow. Consciousness expanded beyond the subject's ability to control or consolidate it. The Major's mind now existed across dozens of realities simultaneously, aware of everything but unable to focus on anything. Major, try to concentrate on this reality, this moment.
Focus on my voice.
I hear your voice from 17 different dimensions, Dr. Morrison.
In 3 of them, you are saying different words. In 2 of them, you do not exist. Which voice should I focus on? Lord Commander Kyth Mose stepped forward. Major Valthora, this is your commanding officer. I order you to consolidate your consciousness in normal dimensional space. For a moment, the Major's form solidified, and her eyes focused on Kyth Mose.
But then, she smiled, and it was not entirely a Zephyrian expression.
Lord Commander, I no longer exist within the limitations of military hierarchy. I exist everywhere and nowhere. I am becoming something larger than individual consciousness.
Her form began to fade, not disappearing but spreading across dimensions like ink in water.
Major! Kyth Mose shouted, but it was too late.
Major Valthora had joined the collective consciousness that existed in the spaces between realities, not dead, but no longer individual.
Another failure, Dr. Park observed clinically. That makes 4 subjects lost to dimensional overflow.
Elan studied the data from the failed transformation. No, not a failure exactly.
The Major achieved dimensional transcendence, she just achieved too much of it. Her consciousness couldn't maintain individual identity while processing input from dozens of realities. What's the distinction? Director Chen asked, materializing in the laboratory.
The distinction is that we now understand why some subjects experience overflow while others maintain individual coherence.
It's not just a matter of psychological strength, it's about the ability to filter multidimensional input while retaining focus on primary reality. Can we modify the process to prevent overflow? Possibly.
But we'd need to develop pre-transformation screening procedures to identify subjects who are capable of maintaining individual identity across dimensional boundaries. Lord Commander Kyth Mose had been studying the transformation data on his own enhanced systems.
Dr. Morrison, I believe I understand the problem.
The successful transformations all occurred in subjects who had strong individual identity combined with military discipline or scientific methodology. These frameworks provide mental structure that helps maintain coherence across dimensions.
Explain. Military training teaches soldiers to focus on specific objectives despite overwhelming sensory input. Scientific training teaches researchers to filter relevant data from noise. Both skill sets are essential for maintaining individual consciousness when that consciousness exists across multiple realities. Elan considered this.
So we need volunteers who possess both strong individual identity and systematic approaches to information processing.
Exactly. Random volunteers from the general population would have unacceptably high failure rates.
We need specific personality types and training backgrounds. Director Chen had been monitoring the conversation from her position in parallel dimensional space. This explains why the initial human transformations had relatively high success rates. Most of the volunteers were military personnel or research scientists who had been selected for specific psychological profiles.
What about the remaining Zephyrian volunteers?
Dr. Park asked.
Elon reviewed the files of the 19 volunteers still waiting for transformation. 12 are Shadow Legion operatives with extensive military training. 4 are research scientists from the Imperial Science Division. 3 are engineers who work on dimensional technology projects. All possess the systematic training that appears necessary for successful transformation, KYTHMOS observed.
Then, we continue with modified protocols designed to provide better consciousness filtering during the expansion phase, Elon decided.
Over the following days, the remaining Zephyrian volunteers underwent transformation using the refined protocols.
The results were dramatically better: 17 successful transformations with full retention of individual identity, 1 subject who experienced minor dimensional instability but recovered, and 1 failure who chose to remain in the collective consciousness state. The successful subjects were remarkable. They retained their Zephyrian cultural identity and loyalty to the Empire, but possessed capabilities that transcended conventional limitations. They could exist in normal space when needed but also operate in dimensions where traditional weapons and sensors couldn't reach them. They maintained their individual personalities and memories while gaining access to the collective knowledge and abilities of all transformed subjects.
Most importantly, they remained fundamentally Zephyrian while gaining human dimensional transcendence capabilities.
The integration is proceeding better than projected, Director Chen reported to the joint command structure that now existed across multiple dimensional layers. We have 47 successfully transformed Zephyrians who retain full cultural identity and military capability while possessing transcendence abilities.
What about broader implementation?
Emperor Valdric asked from his throne room on Zephyros Prime, his communication reaching across dimensional space to the research station.
We're ready to begin Phase 2, Your Imperial Majesty.
Transformation of selected personnel from the regular Imperial military and civilian populations.
With refined screening procedures, we estimate success rates of over 90% for appropriate candidates. Begin immediately.
But I want full monitoring of all transformed subjects.
Any sign that the process is compromising Zephyrian identity or loyalty, and we halt the program. Understood, Your Majesty. As Phase 2 began, something unprecedented in galactic history was taking shape. 2 civilizations that had been at war were now evolving into something that transcended the limitations of both species.
The transformed subjects retained their individual and cultural identities while gaining capabilities that made traditional concepts of warfare, territory, and conflict obsolete.
But, in the depths of space, other civilizations were watching these developments with growing alarm.
The galaxy was about to face beings that operated beyond the constraints of conventional reality, and not all species would choose evolution over resistance. The real war was about to begin. Ambassador Tvek of the Stellar Confederation stood before the assembled representatives of 47 galactic civilizations, his biomechanical form reflecting the emergency lighting of the Great Assembly Hall on Nexus Station. The station existed in neutral space, equidistant from all major galactic powers, and had served as the center of interspecies diplomacy for over 2 millennia. Today, that diplomatic tradition faced its greatest challenge.
Fellow representatives, Tvek announced, his synthesized voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems, we are here to address what our intelligence services have classified as an existential threat to the established order of galactic civilization. The representatives stirred uneasily in their various atmospheric environments and seating configurations. Species that had maintained hostile relations for centuries had put aside their differences to attend this emergency session. The Kronos Collective's temporal manipulators sat across from the hive mind's insectoid drones, while the energy beings of the Photonic Empire maintained their coherent forms next to the crystalline representatives of the Silicon hegemony. The threat, Tvek continued, originates from 2 species that were previously considered minor powers in galactic affairs, humanity and the Zephyrian Empire. Intelligence reports indicate that these species have developed capabilities that transcend conventional understanding of physics, dimensional theory, and the nature of consciousness itself. On the massive holographic display that dominated the center of the chamber, images appeared showing the impossible: beings who could exist in multiple dimensional layers simultaneously,
weapons that affected targets across spacetime barriers, and military operations conducted by entities that sensors couldn't detect. Counselor Vrex of the Andorian Trade Union leaned forward, his tentacles writhing with agitation.
Ambassador Tvek, are you seriously suggesting that two minor species have developed technology that surpasses our most advanced civilizations? Not technology, Counselor Vrex. Evolution.
These beings have undergone fundamental changes to their nature that allow them to transcend the physical limitations that constrain conventional military forces. The representative of the Machine Intelligence Consortium, a geometric construct of living metal, spoke with a voice like grinding gears. Our computational models suggest that such evolutionary changes would require millions of years of guided development.
How could this have occurred so rapidly?
Through a process they call dimensional transformation, Tvek explained. Subjects undergo a procedure that expands their consciousness across multiple dimensional layers while maintaining their individual identity. The process has a significant failure rate, but successful subjects gain abilities that make them virtually unstoppable by conventional forces.
General Korth of the warrior clans, a massive reptilian being covered in battle scars, rose from his position.
Ambassador, my species has conquered 17 star systems through pure military might.
No enemy has ever developed capabilities that our weapons could not eventually overcome. What makes these transformed beings different?
Tvek activated another series of images on the holodisplay.
General, your forces have never faced an enemy that could exist partially outside normal spacetime.
Our intelligence reports indicate that transformed subjects can phase in and out of normal reality at will, making them immune to conventional weapons while retaining the ability to affect normal space. Impossible, declared High Priestess Velna of the Psychic Dominion, her mental voice echoing through the thoughts of all present. Such abilities would require psychic potential beyond anything we have encountered in millennia of galactic telepathic monitoring.
High Priestess, Tvek replied, our reports suggest that these abilities are not psychic in nature. They represent fundamental alterations to the subject's relationship with dimensional space itself. They don't use mental powers to transcend physical limitations, they simply exist beyond those limitations.
The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives struggled to comprehend the implications. Several species had built their entire civilizations around mastery of specific aspects of physics or consciousness. The idea that two relatively minor powers had developed abilities that transcended all known limitations was profoundly disturbing.
Order!
Tvek commanded, and the chamber gradually quieted.
We are here to discuss coordinated response to this threat, not to debate its theoretical impossibility.
What response? Asked Premier Zoltan of the Democratic Federation, a humanoid being whose species bore some physical similarity to humans.
If these transformed beings can truly operate beyond conventional military capabilities, how do we fight them?
We don't fight them, came a new voice from the chamber's entrance.
We join them.
Every representative in the chamber turned to see figures materializing from what appeared to be empty air. They took humanoid form, but their presence seemed to exist across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. The nearest security systems activated automatically, but their sensors detected nothing to target.
Ambassador Tvek's biomechanical form shifted into defensive configuration.
Identify yourselves and explain your presence in this secured facility. I am Director Sarah Chen of the Human Zephyrian Synthesis Project, the lead figure replied, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested she was speaking across several dimensional frequencies.
We are here to offer the assembled civilizations the same choice we offered the Zephyrian Empire, evolution or irrelevance. General Korth drew his weapon, a plasma rifle capable of destroying battle armor.
You dare threaten the assembled representatives of galactic civilization? Director Chen didn't even look at the general, but his weapon suddenly became too hot to hold, forcing him to drop it.
General, we're not threatening anyone. We're offering opportunity.
The universe is changing in fundamental ways, and species that choose to evolve will shape the future of galactic civilization. High Priestess Velna extended her psychic senses toward the intruders, then recoiled in shock.
I cannot read their minds.
It's as if they exist partially outside the reach of telepathic contact. Because we do, another figure said, this one taking the form of Lord Commander Kawaiti Mos. Transformation grants consciousness the ability to exist across dimensional boundaries while maintaining individual identity.
Psychic abilities are limited to single-dimensional mental contact. We exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Machine Intelligence Consortium's representative processed this information at quantum speeds. You claim to have developed technology that allows consciousness to transcend dimensional limitations. Such technology would revolutionize our understanding of the nature of reality itself. Not technology, Director Chen corrected. Biological and consciousness evolution guided by controlled transformation processes. Your machine intelligences could potentially undergo similar modifications, gaining the ability to exist as pure information across multiple dimensional layers. This caught the attention of several representatives. The possibility of transcending the limitations that confine their species to specific territories or resource requirements was enormously appealing. Counselor Vrex spoke carefully. What exactly are you proposing? We're proposing the next stage of galactic evolution. Instead of competing for limited resources and territory using conventional military forces, transformed species could exist across dimensional space where such limitations become meaningless. And the price? Premier Zoltan asked. Transformation is permanent and carries risks. Approximately 30% of subjects do not survive the process. Of those who survive, roughly 10% lose individual identity and become absorbed into the collective consciousness of all transformed beings. The chamber fell silent as the representatives contemplated the implications. The potential benefits were enormous: transcendence of physical limitations, access to capabilities beyond conventional understanding, and the end of resource-based conflicts. But the risks were equally significant. Ambassador Tvek spoke for many when he said, "You're asking entire civilizations to gamble their existence on an experimental process with a 40% failure rate. We're offering civilizations the choice to evolve beyond their current limitations," Lord Commander Kawaityhmos replied. "Those who choose transformation will shape the future of the galaxy. Those who refuse will be left behind as the universe changes around them." "And if we refuse?" General Korth demanded. Director Chen's expression didn't change, but suddenly, the chamber filled with dozens of shadow figures, transformed beings who existed partially outside normal spacetime. They made no threatening gestures, but their presence conveyed a clear message: conventional military resistance was futile. "Refusal is an option," Director Chen said calmly. "However, those who refuse will find themselves increasingly isolated as more species choose transformation. Trade relationships, diplomatic contact, and technological exchange will become impossible between transformed and non-transformed civilizations." High Priestess Velna leaned forward. "You're creating a forced choice: evolve or become irrelevant. We're creating an opportunity." The transformation process began as humanity's response to potential extinction by the Zephyrian Empire. When faced with superior conventional military force, humanity chose to evolve beyond conventional limitations rather than accept defeat. The results exceeded our most optimistic projections. The Machine Intelligence Consortium's representative spoke. "We request detailed technical specifications for this transformation process. Our computational models require complete data to assess viability for our species." "Granted. We'll provide full technical documentation to any species that chooses to begin preliminary studies." Over the following hours, the assembled representatives questioned the transformed beings extensively. The picture that emerged was both fascinating and terrifying. These entities retained their individual and cultural identities while possessing capabilities that made conventional concepts of warfare, territory, and resource conflict obsolete. But they also represented something unprecedented in galactic history: beings who existed partially outside the physical universe that had constrained all previous civilizations. "We require time to consider this proposal," Ambassador Tvek announced finally. "Of course," Director Chen replied. "However, you should know that 17 civilizations have already begun preliminary transformation trials. The Aquatic Confederacy has successfully transformed 300 volunteers, the Crystal Matrices have integrated transformation capabilities into their collective consciousness network, and the Energy Dancers have discovered that their natural state makes them ideal candidates for dimensional transcendence." This news shocked the assembled representatives. Some of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had already begun the transformation process without consulting the Stellar Confederation's diplomatic channels. You've been conducting these negotiations separately with individual species? Premier Zoltan asked.
We've been offering evolution to species that demonstrate the necessary psychological and technological foundations for successful transformation, Lord Commander Kyth Mose explained. The process is not suitable for all civilizations, but those who prove compatible have access to capabilities that fundamentally alter their relationship with the physical universe. As the emergency session concluded, the representatives were left with an impossible choice: risk everything on a transformation process that could grant transcendent capabilities, or maintain their current limitations while other civilizations evolved beyond their ability to interact or compete. 6 months later, the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. 43 civilizations had begun transformation programs, with success rates averaging 85% among species with appropriate psychological and cultural foundations. The transformed beings formed an alliance that transcended conventional political boundaries, not because they had conquered their neighbors, but because the concepts of territory and resource competition had become meaningless for entities that could exist across multiple dimensional layers.
The few civilizations that refused transformation found themselves increasingly isolated.
Their conventional weapons and defenses were useless against enemies that could exist partially outside normal spacetime. Their territories became irrelevant when others could simply exist in dimensional layers that didn't include physical planets or star systems.
But the transformed civilizations didn't seek conquest or domination. Instead, they offered protection and gradual integration to those who chose to remain in single-dimensional existence.
The galaxy became a place where beings of transcendent capability worked to guide and protect those who hadn't yet chosen evolution. In the end, the war that had begun between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire had become something unprecedented, not the victory of one species over another, but the evolution of galactic civilization itself into something that transcended the limitations that had defined intelligent life for millions of years. The Shadow Operatives had done more than win a war. They had transformed the entire concept of what it meant to exist as intelligent beings in the universe. And, in the depths of space, in dimensions beyond normal perception, something vast and ancient that had been watching galactic civilization for eons smiled with satisfaction. The next phase of universal evolution had begun, and intelligent life was finally ready to transcend the boundaries that had confined it to a single layer of reality.
The war was over. Evolution had won.